The weapon wasn't what scared them. It was the hole. Senior archivist Vessel of Recorded Truths had processed 10,000 after-action reports in her career. She had cataloged the wreckage of the Brenari purges, documented the slow mechanical death of the Chorus Collective, filed the cold arithmetic of 100 minor species who had chosen expansion over diplomacy, and paid the expected price. She understood war the way a physician understands disease, as a pattern, a progression, a set of predictable stages moving toward predictable conclusions. But she had never seen a hole like this. The imaging drone had captured it from 40,000 kilometers, a perfect circular puncture through the forward armor of the dreadnought Unyielding Proclamation Asterisk, 3 meters in diameter, edges so clean they looked machined rather than struck, passing through 14 centimeters of compressed lattice Varenthian battle steel as though the metal had simply agreed to step aside. No scorch, no deformation, no explosive cavity behind the entry wound. The round had continued through the interior of the ship, through 3 decks, through the primary coolant manifold, through the rear armor, and out the other side. It had not exploded. It had simply asterisk passed through, carrying everything it knew about momentum and kept going. Vessel of Recorded Truth stared at the image for a long time before she reached for her notation stylus. Then she set it down again. Then she looked at the timestamp on the report. The hole had been made from a planetary surface. From asterisk below asterisk. From a species that, 6 weeks prior, had been formally assessed by the Galactic Council's Threat Evaluation Bureau as, and she located the exact phrasing now, wanting to be precise, asterisk, possessing no meaningful interstellar strike capability, no weapons of appreciable range, and no apparent understanding of the tactical doctrines necessary to threaten a Council-class military formation. She picked up her notation stylus. She wrote 3 words. They were wrong. 6 weeks earlier, Fleet Commander Dross Who Breaks Silence had stood on the observation deck of the asterisk Unyielding Proclamation and laughed. He was not typically a laughing creature. His species, the Veth, elongated, calcium-ridged, built by evolution for patience and calculation, expressed amusement rarely and laughter almost never. It was considered, among his people, a sign of intellectual laziness, a shortcut emotion, something you felt when a situation had been so completely assessed that surprise was no longer possible. Dross laughed because surprise was not possible here. Earth has railguns, said Subcommander Priel, reading from the intercepted broadcast with the flat intonation of someone reading a weather report. She was younger than Dross, her calcium ridges still pale, still soft at the edges. She had not yet learned to not read things aloud simply because they were in front of her. I heard you the first time, Dross said. They are broadcasting this as a warning to us, specifically. Priel looked up from her tablet. They have named the weapons. They have given them individual names. What kind of names? Priel looked back at the screen. Patience, long argument, the last word, she paused. Grandmother's opinion. Dross said nothing for 3 seconds, then he laughed again. They named their planetary defense cannon asterisk grandmother's opinion. There appear to be 7 of them in total, Priel said, and something in her voice was almost apologetic, as if she felt personally responsible for how absurd this was. Distributed across 3 continents, the humans are claiming they can strike any orbital position within range of the planet. Dross turned back to the viewport, where the blue-green curve of the human homeworld hung against the dark, impossibly fragile-looking, impossibly beautiful in the way that all living planets were beautiful if you allowed yourself a moment of stillness before the work began. What does the threat assessment say? Chemical propellant artillery, electromagnetic acceleration systems, kinetic projectiles, no exotic payloads confirmed. She was reading carefully now, and Dross noticed that she did not editorialize, did not add her own dismissal to what was already implicit in the words. Maximum theoretical muzzle velocity 12 kilometers per second. Maximum theoretical effective range. She stopped. Priel. The Bureau assessed maximum theoretical effective range at 400 kilometers. 400 kilometers. His fleet was positioned at 40,000, 10 times that distance, and that was before the natural curvature of the planet's geometry factored in, before the atmospheric drag that would shred a chemically propelled round, before the simple mathematics of trying to hit a moving target in three-dimensional space from a fixed planetary surface, with something that traveled at 12 kilometers per second. His fleet could be anywhere in this system, in the time it took one of those rounds to theoretically reach orbital altitude. They want us to retreat, Dross said, because of this. They are requesting, Priel said carefully, that we halt the resource extraction mandate pending council review of their petition for. They want us to retreat, Dross repeated, not a question, a conclusion, because of 7 guns that cannot reach us with ranges the Bureau assessed as insufficient by an order of magnitude, firing projectiles that carry no warhead. He turned from the viewport. File a formal refusal. Begin approach to extraction altitude. We proceed on schedule. Priel filed the refusal. The schedule held for exactly 19 hours. The first indication that something was different arrived in a form nobody, aboard the unyielding proclamation, was prepared to process. Silence. Not the silence of a system going offline, not the static pop of a jammed frequency. The communications array was fully functional, every diagnostic confirmed it, and yet at precisely 04:17 ship standard, 3 of the 4 forward escort vessels simply stopped transmitting. No distress signal, no emergency burn, no debris field on long-range scan. Just silence where 3 ships had been. Dross was in his command chair in 11 seconds. He had been sleeping, which for Veth is a light and cautious state, and the alarm pulled him out of it cleanly. Report. Forward escorts measured response asterisk careful deliberation and proportional force have ceased all communication. The duty officer's voice had that specific quality that voices get when they are trying to be professional about something they do not understand. Long-range scan shows no signatures at their last confirmed positions. Sensor sweep is a pause. Negative contact. We cannot locate them. Dross looked at the display. 3 ships, combined displacement of nearly 4 million tons, gone. How long from last contact to loss of signal? Measured response went silent first. Signal loss was instantaneous. No distortion period, no power fluctuation signature, no emergency. How long from last contact to loss of signal? The duty officer checked again, 18 milliseconds. The command deck was very quiet. That's not a weapon malfunction, Dross said, mostly to himself. That's not a catastrophic failure, 18 milliseconds. He stood up. What hits a 4 million ton warship in 18 milliseconds? Nobody answered because nobody knew. 3 minutes later, the 4th escort went silent. 6 minutes after that, somebody on the long-range sensor array found the hole in the unyielding proclamation's forward armor. The hole that was not supposed to be there, that had passed through 14 centimeters of compressed lattice battle steel and 3 interior decks and the primary coolant manifold, and had done all of this without triggering a single impact alarm, because the impact alarms were calibrated for explosions, for energy discharge, for blast radius. Not for a rod of dense metal traveling at a velocity that the Bureau had assessed as theoretically impossible from a planetary surface . Get me the human frequency, Dross said. The communications officer opened it without being told twice. Static. Then a human voice, female, Dross would learn later, though he couldn't distinguish it at the time, speaking in the clipped, precise tones of someone who had been awake for a long time and was not going to let that show. Fleet Commander, this is Colonel Mara Chen, Earth Defense Command. I want you to know that we are tracking 12 of your vessels at this moment. I want you to know that we have been tracking them for approximately 90 hours. And I want you to know that we named these weapons the things we named them, because we wanted you to understand something important about our psychology before this conversation became necessary. A pause. Grandmother's opinion has been firing for 47 minutes. You're going to want to check your escort positions. The line stayed open. Dross looked at the empty positions on his display, where 4 escorts had been. The Bureau, he said very quietly, assessed your maximum effective range at 400 kilometers. I know, Chen said. We wrote that assessment. The command deck went completely still. This is where Vessel of Recorded Truths had to stop reading the first time, set down the file, and spend several minutes with her eyes closed. Because what Chen had just said, we wrote that assessment, carried an implication so large that she had missed it on first pass. The way you sometimes miss something enormous because your brain refuses to process it until you're ready. The Threat Evaluation Bureau's assessment of Earth's defensive capabilities had been constructed from human-provided data, from transmissions, from observable test firings, from what the humans had allowed to be seen and measured and filed. The Bureau had assessed Earth as limited because the humans had shown them limited things, specific things, carefully chosen things. The humans had not failed to conceal their capabilities. They had succeeded in concealing them, for years, possibly for decades. They had fed information to the Bureau with the patience of a species that understood it was being watched, and they had fed it just enough truth to produce a specific, useful conclusion. 400 kilometers, a number small enough to be dismissed, large enough to be plausible. And while the Bureau was processing that number, writing it into formal assessments that Dross would read and trust and use to make decisions, somewhere on 3 different continents, in facilities that weren't where the observable tests had been, humans were building something that could reach orbital altitude at a velocity the Bureau hadn't believed was physically achievable with their technology. Which meant the second mystery was larger than the first. It wasn't just that the weapons could reach the fleet. It was how long they had been building toward this moment while appearing to be exactly as limited as expected. And that led, Vessel of Recorded Truths felt her stylus moving without quite intending it to the third mystery, the one that sat underneath everything else like a weight you only feel after you've been carrying it for a while. What else had they hidden? What else had they decided not to show? Back in the moment, on the command deck of the Unyielding Proclamation Dross was experiencing the specific cognitive state that his species called Verthalan *, which translates roughly as the recognition that one is inside a plan one did not know was executing. He was a careful commander. He had not survived 30 years of Council Fleet command by failing to adapt. So he did what careful commanders do when they discover they are inside an unknown plan. He stopped moving. All ships halt approach, he said. Maintain current position. Do not maneuver. Do not change output profiles. Priel looked at him. If we maneuver, we present different. If we maneuver, Dross said, we confirm to Colonel Chen that her weapons can make us maneuver. And until I understand what we're dealing with, I don't want her to have any more information than she already does. He opened the channel again. Colonel, I'm curious about something. Ask, Chen said. Why are you still talking to me? A pause, shorter than it should have been. She had expected the question. Because the weapons can't do what I need them to do by themselves. And what do you need them to do? Change your mind, she said. What Dross did not know, what the command deck did not know, what even the Council's senior analysts would not piece together for another 3 weeks, was that Colonel Mara Chen was operating on approximately 6 hours of sleep spread across the previous 4 days, was running the conversation from a facility that had been built 40 meters underground specifically, because she had calculated the probability of orbital bombardment at 31% before the dialogue opened, and was coordinating in real time with 8 other facilities across 3 continents, any one of which could be destroyed in the next 20 minutes if Dross decided that talking was less efficient than retaliating. She was also aware that she had lied to him, not about the weapons, not about the assessment, but about the specific capabilities still in reserve. Grandmother's opinion was not the largest of the 7. It was not even the second largest. It had been chosen to fire first because its position, its angle, and its target selection would produce the most asterisk visible, results with the least asterisk total expenditure, because Chen had done the math, and the math said she had approximately 114 minutes of uncontested firing time before the Council Fleet's tactical AI would identify the predictive algorithm underlying the targeting, adapt its countermeasures, and begin to neutralize the advantage. 114 minutes. She had used 47 of them. In the remaining 67, she needed to end a war, negotiate a treaty, or buy enough time for the third option. The one she hadn't told anyone about yet, not the Council of Nations, not the Earth Defense Committee, not even the President, who was at that moment sheltering 3 kilometers below Washington and trusting that Chen knew what she was doing. The third option was the one that would work. It was also the one that would cost the most. "Commander Dross," she said, "I need to tell you something about the human approach to negotiation." "I'm listening." "We don't negotiate from strength. That's a misconception most species have about us." She kept her voice level, conversational, the same voice she'd used to brief soldiers before operations where the projected casualty rate made professional neutrality feel like a cruelty. "We negotiate from investment. We negotiate hardest when we have already lost something we can't recover, because at that point, there is no calculation of acceptable loss. There is only the mission." Dross was quiet for a moment. "You're describing irrationality." "I'm describing commitment," Chen said. "They're not the same thing, even when they look identical from the outside." The 4th escort had been the Even Exchange Asterisk. Vessel of Recorded Truths pulled its final telemetry, what little existed, and studied it with the methodical attention she gave to all documents she suspected would eventually define something. The projectile that had destroyed the Asterisk Even Exchange had struck at a vector angle of 34.7 degrees above the orbital plane. For it to have been fired from a planetary surface at that angle, it must have been launched from a latitude, and at a timing that the Bureau had specifically assessed as asterisk, geometrically impossible for the type of system the humans were known to possess. The key phrase, she noted, was asterisk known to possess. The Bureau had assessed what the humans were known to possess. They had assessed the observable capabilities, the demonstrated test results, the intercepted technical specifications, all of which were real, all of which were accurate, all of which were also carefully curated to support a specific, limited conclusion. What the Bureau had not assessed, had not been able to assess, because assessment requires data, was what the humans were capable of building when nobody was watching them carefully, when they believed the watching eyes were focused on the things they had been pointed at. There was a facility in a mountain range in a region called the Pamirs. The Bureau had a file on it. The file described a geothermal research station, and the file was supported by thermal imagery, personnel manifests, supply chain documentation, and 8 years of low-level communications traffic that formed, in aggregate, a convincing portrait of a boring facility doing boring things in a cold and remote place. The facility had been operational as a railgun installation for 6 years. The geothermal research station was real. It operated in the lowest level of the facility. Its thermal signature was real. Its personnel were real scientists doing real research. The weapon was underneath them. The scientists didn't know. "You use civilians as cover," Dross said. He had received the intelligence summary from the Bureau's emergency review team 11 minutes into the conversation, and his voice had changed. Not louder, quieter, which for Veth is the direction anger goes when it becomes dangerous. You placed your own researchers above a military installation without their knowledge. Yes, Chen said. That's a violation of. I know what it violates. No apology in her voice, no defensiveness either, just the flat acknowledging weight of someone who has already processed the moral cost and accepted it. I made that decision. I will account for it afterward. Right now, I need you to understand something more important. More important than using your own civilians as. The facility in the Pamirs, she said, is not the one I'm worried about you finding. Draw stopped. There are things I have told you tonight to demonstrate capability, Chen continued. There are things I have told you tonight to demonstrate intent. And there is one thing I have not told you, which I am going to tell you now, because we are approaching the point in this conversation where you will begin calculating the cost-benefit of destroying the planet's surface to stop the weapons rather than retreating. And I need you to complete that calculation correctly. A longer pause this time, the kind that contains preparation. We have approximately 63 missiles, she said, each carrying a payload that your shield systems will recognize as a standard chemical warhead. They are not standard chemical warheads. They are something we have been developing for 11 years in a program that does not appear in any document your intelligence assets have ever accessed because the program has never been digital. Everything related to it was written by hand, by 12 people, in one room. With no external communication of any kind. She let that settle. If those missiles reach your fleet, Commander, your fleet will stop existing. Not most of it, not significant portions of it. All of it. Everything in orbit of this planet within 12,000 kilometers will stop existing. The channel was open. The silence on both ends was absolute. I don't believe you, Dross said, finally. I know, Chen said, and her voice did something unexpected then. It softened just slightly, just at the edges, the way a voice does when it's carrying something heavy and stops trying to hide the weight. I know you don't. That's not the problem. Then what is the problem? The problem, she said, is that you can't afford to be right. Vessel of Recorded Truths had interviewed Dross once, after the withdrawal, in the formal debrief that the council had required. She had asked him carefully what it had felt like in that moment, the moment when Chen said you can't afford to be right asterisk. He had been quiet for a long time before answering. I have spent my career, he said, making decisions based on assessments. I trust assessments because assessments are built from data. Data does not have emotions. Data does not have a survival imperative that overrides rational calculation. He paused. What Chen did was not show me data. She showed me a decision tree. She showed me the branch where she was lying and I withdrew, and I survived, and humanity survived, and the fleet survived, and the resource extraction mandate lapsed into council review. And she showed me the branch where she was telling the truth and I didn't withdraw, and the fleet was gone. 12,000 ships across the quadrant received the news. The council's capacity in this sector was reduced to nothing. The political consequences for a generation. He was quiet again. The mathematics of that decision tree do not require Chen to be telling the truth. They only require that I cannot be certain she is lying. And she had, by that point in the conversation, demonstrated that she understood the difference between those two things far better than I did. Vessel of Recorded Truths had noted that, filed it, and returned to it many times afterward. Because what Dross was describing, what Chen had constructed over 11 years of careful concealment and 47 minutes of carefully chosen demonstration, was not a deterrent in the traditional sense. A traditional deterrent says, I have this capability, fear it. What Chen had built was something different, something that required no capability at all to function, as long as the uncertainty was total. The 63 missiles may have existed. The payload may have been what she claimed. Or the missiles may have been conventional warheads in a launch facility built entirely to support a single conversation. Vessel of Recorded Truths did not know. Neither did the Bureau. Neither, she suspected, would anyone ever know with certainty, because the program had been analog, because the 12 people were dispersed, because the documentation was, if it had ever existed in physical form, almost certainly no longer in a condition to be reviewed. The humans had built a weapon that functioned even if it wasn't real. And that, she thought, was the part that should have frightened everyone most, and had somehow been the part most consistently underweighted in every analysis she had read. But she was moving too fast. She was doing what analysts did when they encountered something that reorganized their understanding. She was trying to reach the shape of it before she had processed all the material. She forced herself back to the sequence of events. After Chen's statement about the missiles, there were 22 minutes of what the transcripts recorded as silence, but which the supplemental audio analysis revealed was not silence at all. It was Dross, on a separate internal channel, running calculations with his tactical team, running them and running them again, and a third time. Then Priel's voice, captured by the still-open channel to the human frequency. "Sir, I need to tell you something." "Priel." "I've been tracking the weapon signatures since the first escorts went silent." Her voice was young and careful and trying to be neither. "The pattern is not random. They are not shooting at the nearest targets. They are not shooting at the most valuable targets. They are eliminating vessels in a specific sequence that," she stopped, started again. "The sequence matches our communication relay hierarchy. They are shooting the vessels that, if removed, most degrade our ability to coordinate a response. They are not attacking our firepower. They are attacking our thinking." The silence from Dross lasted 4 seconds. "They planned this before we arrived," he said. "They planned this before we arrived." Another silence. Then slowly, something that was not quite a laugh, but occupied the same space in his voice that a laugh would have. "They knew we would come," he said. "They prepared for the specific fleet configuration the Council's standard doctrine would use. They built their targeting strategy around our tactical communication architecture." "It appears so," Priel said. "How long have they known?" Priel's answer was barely audible. "Long enough to build 7 railguns in secret, sir." The channel to Chen's frequency was still open. Chen on the other end said nothing. She didn't need to. What had happened in the following 40 minutes was, in Vessel of Recorded Truth's professional assessment, the most significant 40 minutes in the recorded history of human council relations, and quite possibly in the history of the council itself. Not because of what was decided, because of the process by which it was decided and what that process revealed. Dross had not retreated because he was afraid of the missiles. He had retreated because he had completed the calculation that Chen had needed him to complete, the calculation that accounted for what was known, what was demonstrated, and what remained unknown in a form that could not be resolved by additional analysis. The unknowns did not shrink under scrutiny. They expanded. Every answer Chen had provided had produced a larger question. The weapon exists. How long have they been building weapons like this? The assessment was fabricated. What other assessments are wrong? The targeting follows our doctrine. How deeply do they understand our military thinking? The facility used civilians as cover. What other facilities exist that we cannot identify by the usual signatures? The missiles may exist. Do they have other deterrents we haven't been told about? The humans negotiated for months before this conversation. What were they negotiating for in all the other conversations we considered resolved? And underneath all of it, the question Dross had articulated in the debrief, the question that Vessel of Recorded Truths could not stop returning to. How long had they been watching us watch them? How long had they been counting on us to watch exactly what they pointed us at, and see exactly what they wanted us to see, and draw exactly the conclusions they needed us to draw? The withdrawal order was filed at 0643 Ship Standard. It was a provisional withdrawal framed, for the Council's consumption, as a strategic repositioning pending further assessment of the tactical environment. The language was careful, diplomatic, designed to protect Dross from formal censure. He would face an inquiry anyway, but the language would help. The resource extraction mandate entered Council review. It would remain in review for 17 months before being quietly archived, never formally canceled but never executed, becoming one of those documents that both sides understood to be dead while treating it as technically alive. Chen's last transmission before the fleet crossed out of optimal engagement range was brief. She had by that point been awake for nearly 100 hours, and her voice carried it, not weakness, not exhaustion, but the specific flatness of a person who has spent too long maintaining a performance and is allowing the professional exterior to thin at the very end, when it doesn't need to hold anymore. Commander Dross, I want you to know that I didn't want this to happen. Which part? Dross asked. Any of it, she said. The escorts, the Pamir's facility, the conversation, the calculation I asked you to make. A pause. We have a concept called deterrence. The theory is that if a potential cost is sufficiently high, conflict becomes irrational and can be prevented. The theory is sound. The problem is that building a deterrent that works always costs something. Another pause, longer. We started building Grandmother's opinion in 2031. I was 8 years old in 2031. The people who started building it knew they would never see it used. They built it anyway, for me, for people they would never meet. Her voice was entirely flat now, and Vessel of Recorded Truths, reading the transcript years later, would find herself stopping at this exact line and sitting with it for a long time. I have spent 40 years maintaining something they built for me. I'd like not to have to explain what it costs to the people who come after me. Dross did not respond immediately. When he did, it was not in any language the communication protocols required. How many of you knew? He asked. How many people over how many years maintained this program, kept this secret, built these things in silence and said nothing? Chen made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been something else entirely. Thousands, she said. Tens of thousands. Across 100 years of different governments, different administrations, different political systems that didn't agree on anything else. The sound again, the one Vessel of Recorded Truths could not categorize. That's the thing about humans, Commander. We don't need our governments to agree. We just need enough of us to decide something matters. The fleet crossed out of engagement, range 11 minutes later. Vessel of Recorded Truths filed her report 14 months after the withdrawal. It was the longest document she had ever produced, not because there was more factual material than usual, but because she kept reaching conclusions and then discovering, each time, that the conclusion was sitting on top of another conclusion that was larger and less comfortable. The final version ran to 47,000 words. The Council received it, filed it, and marked it for restricted review. The section they restricted most heavily was not the one about the railguns. It was not the section about the fabricated assessment, or the Pamir's facility, or the missiles that may or may not have existed. It was the final section. The section Vessel of Recorded Truths had almost cut 3 times before deciding it was the only honest way to end the document. It read in part, the galactic community's fundamental misclassification of human military potential did not result from a failure of intelligence methodology. Our methodology was applied correctly. Our data collection was thorough. Our analysis was sound. We failed because we assumed the data we were collecting was the data we were meant to collect. The humans understood something we did not, that the most effective concealment does not hide the subject. It redirects the observer. We were not watching humans build weapons. We were watching humans show us humans who were not building weapons. The distinction is small enough to miss. The consequences are large enough to constitute the most significant intelligence failure in the Council's modern history. There is a further matter that this office is compelled to note. despite its resistance to political implications. In the 14 months since the withdrawal, 3 other Council member species have quietly filed requests to review their own Threat Evaluation Bureau assessments of human capabilities. 2 additional species have informally inquired about the methodology by which the original assessment was constructed. The Bureau has received 17 requests for clarification of the phrase maximum theoretical effective range, as it appears in the Earth assessment. This office recommends that the Council not treat these inquiries as a crisis of confidence in the Bureau. They are not. They are a rational response to information that was previously unavailable. This office further recommends that the Council consider a possibility that has not yet been formally articulated in any document, and which this office raises not as a finding but as a question. Asterisk. If the humans understood, decades in advance, that a Council resource extraction fleet would eventually arrive, and if they prepared for that specific scenario with the specificity we have now documented, what other scenarios have they prepared for? Colonel Chen, in the final transmission before the fleet withdrew, stated that tens of thousands of humans maintained this program across 100 years and multiple governments without disclosing it, because they had decided it mattered. What else have they decided matters? What are they building now? This office does not have answers to these questions. This office suspects that obtaining answers is, by design, impossible, because the humans have had 100 years to practice ensuring that things they do not want found cannot be found. We know what they showed us. We do not know what they did not show us. That gap between what they showed us and what exists is where the real assessment must happen. This office does not have the capability to perform that assessment. This office is not certain any capability in the Council does. The unyielding proclamation has been repaired. The hole in its forward armor has been filled. The filing on the repair is complete. But the imaging archive still exists. The original photograph, the 3-meter circle of impossibly clean puncture through 14 centimeters of battle steel, edges so precise they looked machined, the round passing through and keeping going because it carried everything it knew about momentum and had nowhere specific it needed to be, remains in the active database. This office looks at it sometimes. It is not the weapon that is frightening. It is not the velocity, or the range, or the concealment, or even the strategic sophistication of a species that prepared for a specific war decades before it started and then chose not to fight it. It is the name. Grandmother's opinion. Someone decided, 100 years ago, that the appropriate name for a weapon that would one day end a war before it began, that would speak, in silence and in holes through impossible metal, to a fleet commander who would one day have to choose between action and restraint, was a name that referenced the quietest possible authority, the kind that doesn't argue, the kind that simply knows and waits and has already considered everything you are about to say. This office has spent 14 months analyzing the withdrawal. This office believes it understands the weapons. This office believes it understands the deception. This office believes it understands the strategy. This office does not understand the name. And in the absence of understanding, in the space between what humans show us and what they quietly, patiently, across generations, in rooms with no windows and documents that burn, continue to build, this office recommends that the Council, for perhaps the first time in its history, consider the possibility that understanding is not available. We can only note what we know. They decided it mattered. They were not wrong. The report was filed. The Council reviewed it. The Bureau reformed its methodology for assessing emergent species capabilities, a reform that produced 17 new protocols and one simple change to the standard language of every subsequent threat evaluation, the removal of the phrase maximum theoretical effective range, replaced, in all future documents, with a phrase that one junior analyst had suggested, and which had somehow survived the committee process intact. Maximum observed range. Observed, not theoretical, not calculated, not assessed from provided data. What had been seen? Only what had been seen. Because somewhere, in a mountain range or beneath a desert or inside a building that looked, from every angle that mattered, like something entirely ordinary, somewhere in the quiet spaces between what humans chose to show and what humans chose to keep, the work continued. It always had. It always would. The galaxy had laughed at 7 railguns, and a fleet had gone silent. And even now, even with everything documented and filed and assessed and reformed and reviewed, even with the hole in the asterisk unyielding proclamations asterisk armor filled, and the photograph archived, and the report restricted, and the missiles unconfirmed, and the program analog and scattered and unknowable, even now, the most accurate thing the Council could say about humanity was the same thing it had always been. We know what they showed us. We do not know what they are building in the dark. We do not know what they have decided. In quiet rooms matters. We only know they have decided. And they are patient. And they have been at this for a very long time. And grandmother's opinion is still there. Still loaded. Still waiting. Still carrying everything it knows about momentum. And having